Hello, everybody. I am back. You are back. And we have something a little different for you today because I really wanted to do something smart on the climate change talks that are about to kick off in Dubai. And I didn't have anything. I didn't have any guests on that. I found out too late that was happening. I didn't have it on my radar. And so it begins the 30th, goes to December 12th, the UN climate talks, COP28 it's called. And so what I did was I reached out to my friend David Rothkopf, who hosted a great conversation on his Deep State radio show, Road to COP28, with Stanford's Mark Jacobson, which I really enjoyed. And I said, hey, can I just share that on my feed, on my show? And he said, absolutely. So a lot of the big podcasts, they're part of networks, and they drop another podcast in their feed to help get that one off the ground or help promote it. And so some of us other independent podcasters are starting to do that with and for each other. And so can't hurt. It's just promoting their great work. And Rothkopf does a great interview with his excellent guest, Stanford's Mark Jacobson. And that is what you will hear starting at 20 minutes in. But first, I do want to say hi and hope that you had a great Thanksgiving. Hope you had some time with the people you like or even love the most. Hopefully the irritating and annoying ones either didn't show up or they just weren't that bad. Hope you had some good food, some leftovers, all guilt-free. I ate my face off with my family. We had a great time. I spent a lot of time outside. It was beautiful weather here in the Northeast. But now for many of us, things are returning to, quote, normal for a few weeks until Christmas. And then, of course, there's Taint Week between Christmas and New Year's, which I always work. I think I probably will this year as well. But I've got some great shows planned for you over the next few weeks. So thanks so much for joining me today. And whenever you do, now please go tell your friends because we can't keep doing this if we don't keep growing. That being said, thank you for a few new subscriptions over the last week. Very happy to have you and hope to see you at our Thursday night hangout at any time on the Discord chat platform. If you haven't figured that out or have any questions, email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Well, Monday through Thursday, you can find me reading headlines and sharing audio clips that I think are worthy, important, and generally speaking, editorially, I choose the stories that would impact you, your family, your community, your country, and of course, your planet, like I am on today's program. Stories you'd want to hear that impact broadly a wide range of people. That's my general editorial standard here for the news, as well as most of the discussions that I have with experts here on Stand Up. But I take in a lot, and so it allows me to synthesize it and edit and share it with you Monday through Thursday here on Stand Up. I like to think that's a helpful service to remind you that you do live on Earth One and in reality, and I do have a pretty good reputation in terms of finding credible people and information sources to share it with you. So let's do it, shall we? Starting with the big headlines from over the weekend. Or I should say over the past few days, the Thanksgiving holiday, it seems sometimes that the news stops when you're not paying attention to it. But the hostage negotiations and exchanges and statecraft did not stop between the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Palestinians and the Israelis, as negotiated by the Qataris and the Americans and more. Joe Biden, President Biden, getting a tremendous amount of grief here at home and around the world for not calling for a ceasefire while actually clearly had been negotiating for one behind the scenes. David Roberts had a great tweet about that when he said, Joe Biden is going to be more politically hurt by his unwillingness to engage in theatrical calls for a ceasefire than he is politically helped by the fact that behind the scenes, he actually brokered an actual ceasefire. The United States information environment has created perfectly perverse incentives. So well said. Love David Roberts. And here is the latest from the New York Times last night. It's as Hamas releases more hostages, longer ceasefire appears possible. A third group of captives released from Gaza included a 4-year-old dual American-Israeli citizen whose parents were killed in the Hamas attack on October 7th. There's a lot of talk, of course, about these victims and survivors on the Sunday shows. It was absolutely heart-wrenching, but also heartening to see them be reunited when they were. Did you see those videos? They always make me very emotional And how could they not? Really amazing to see these parents reconnect with their children who they thought they'd lost in several situations. But a third group of Gaza Strip hostages, this 4-year-old American whose parents were killed in the Hamas raids in Israel, freed Sunday, raising the prospect more captives could be set free and a fragile truce extended. The 17 hostages released by Hamas who were seized when the militants raided Israel on October 7th included 3 Thai citizens, 1 Russian, and the little girl Abigail Idan, dual American citizen, who was kidnapped from a kibbutz. She marked her 4th birthday in captivity in Gaza on Friday, and I'll have more from the president in the audio section coming up, but let's stick to the headlines. Hamas said it was open to extending the 4-day truce in place since last week. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited troops in Gaza, vowed to fight until victory. But the story here at home was crazy, where in Vermont, Burlington, Vermont, which is a college town. I've been there. My daughter has friends who go to college. My buddy's son goes there at the University of Vermont. Great school. 3 Palestinian Americans were shot, all injured. 2 at least were in intensive care. The police in Vermont investigating the possibility of a hate-motivated crime in the Saturday evening shooting of 3 Palestinian college students in downtown Burlington, Vermont. Burlington police said that a white male with a handgun approached the 3 students as they walked through downtown and, without speaking, shot the 3 men at least 4 times before fleeing on foot. The American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, a civil rights advocacy group, said it believed the students were targeted because they are Palestinians. Police said the 2 are U.S. citizens, 1 is a legal U.S. resident. 3 men are actually students at Brown University, Haverford College, and Trinity College, respectively, had gathered in Burlington to spend Thanksgiving holiday with one of their grandmothers. Of course, federal authorities said they've been responding to a rise in threats against Arab, Jewish, and Muslim communities as anger over the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict has spilled into the protests, street confrontations, and targeted attacks thousands of miles from the war zone. And these stories are obviously absolutely terrible, and I'll be closely following them, reading them, but by all means, if there are anything that aren't being reported or not widely reported, please send it over my way. I'll take a look. standupwithpete@gmail.com. As always, my email for that and everything else. And how about this? The former Minneapolis police officer who was convicted of murdering George Floyd, that is Derek Chauvin, was stabbed in prison by a fellow inmate Friday. He's expected to survive the attack. The wounded convicted killer and ex-cop is in stable condition and expected to survive. The U.S. Prisons Bureau, which has custody of Chauvin, has only said that an unnamed person incarcerated at a lockup in Tucson was hospitalized after being assaulted Friday afternoon and hasn't elaborated. What else can I tell you? Well, today is Cyber Monday, and the deals on Amazon are pretty lousy, according to the New York Times, who did have their own list that they searched hundreds of thousands of deals for, apparently, and I found some stuff on there that I might get. So good luck on Cyber Monday if you're planning on shopping and you want to save money. I guess it is probably a good day, but careful of retail therapy and the lies that it tells you. All right. So let's get now to some audio. First, I wanted to play this clip I heard on The Last Word. That is the MSNBC show hosted by Lawrence O'Donnell. Well, Simone Sanders was in hosting on, I think this was Friday. Was it last week? Yeah, sometime. It doesn't really matter what day it was. I heard it and wanted to share it with you because I think that this expert from the Third Way is really good. She's the senior director of communications, and she basically talked about the only possible election outcomes. I thought her analysis here was very, very good, so I wanted to include about the whole 4 minutes because I think it's worth it. I listened to it twice, and I want everybody to be able to hear and understand this possible and unlikely scenarios, yet this is real smart stuff, and this is Kate DeGrider from the Third Way, Senior Director of Communications on MSNBC's The Last Word.
There are 2 viable options. There is 0 chance that a third-party candidate is going to win the White House in 2024, but that doesn't mean that they aren't a concern. It doesn't take a lot of votes in the right places to make a difference. And I'll give you 2 examples. There were 86,000 fewer third-party votes in just Maricopa County in Arizona from 2016 to 2020. Joe Biden's margin in the state was just 10,000 votes. Similarly, there were about 18,000 fewer votes in Milwaukee County alone in Wisconsin. Biden won the state by about 20,000 votes in 2020. So The challenge that all of us who are concerned about the health of our democracy and keeping Donald Trump out of the White House is going to be to make very clear that any third party that divides the anti-Trump coalition in 2024 is dangerous.
Kate, are there any third party candidates that could be a bigger threat to Donald Trump than to President Biden? I'm thinking maybe RFK Jr.
Well, we haven't seen that yet. Now, obviously, polls are still in the field and we'll have to see. But what we are very concerned about is that Donald Trump's floor and his ceiling are basically the same. So we've all seen how durable his coalition is, alarmingly so, in my opinion. But it doesn't take very much to pull apart the pro-democracy coalition that gave Joe Biden the White House. So our concern is first and foremost on No Labels, which is a new group on the scene. They have actually won ballot access already in 12 states, and that includes 3 of the major battlegrounds. We're obviously going to keep an eye on other third-party candidates. So far, RFK is not on the ballot, and I would note that because he is a named candidate, he is going to need hard money to get on the ballot. And so that means that, money from big donors won't get him there. He's got a much more difficult path. That's one of the areas where No Labels has an advantage. They are skirting the rules to operate as a dark money group while they are pursuing ballot access. And so they are able to use unlimited amounts of money from anonymous donors to help fund their ballot access campaign.
How should Democrats respond to this third party threat in advance of next year's elections? Kate, a lot of young people, and then even a lot of not so young people, are seriously considering voting third party.
I think we need to make very clear that a third party vote is a vote for a second Trump term. And it could happen in a really alarming and chaotic way. One of the trends that we've been watching lately is that No Labels seems to have shifted their strategy. So what we know is that they are looking to put a Republican on the top of their ticket, somebody like John Huntsman, who has views way outside of the mainstream on issues like abortion, for one. And what we think their new plan is to try and win a handful of states in order to force a contingent election, basically to deny either Biden or Trump a path to 270 votes. If that happens, that is likely to trigger the 12th Amendment that would throw the vote of the 2024 election to the House of Representatives. In that crazy scenario, what would happen is the House would vote by delegation. Right now, Republicans control 26 delegations. So a House vote would mean Donald Trump would win in the most chaotic and dangerous way possible.
Kate, we're going to have to leave it there, but that is enough for me to say everybody needs to go out there and vote, make your voice heard.
Yeah, to say the least, there's a lot more than you can do than just voting. Obviously, you can phone bank, you can knock on doors, you can donate money and time and do whatever else you can to spread the word on social media and be as effective as you can. Volunteer on local campaigns. Get involved. Save America, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully it won't come to that hypothetical scenario that she painted, but these third-party runs are definitely disconcerting, to say the least. Specifically, the No Labels one. More to discuss about them coming soon. All right, here is President Biden on the hostage negotiations and more. A couple of minutes from the president over the weekend.
Beginning this morning, under a deal reached by extensive U.S. diplomacy, including numerous calls I've made from the Oval Office to leaders across the region, fighting in Gaza will halt for 4 days. This deal also is structured to allow a pause to continue for more than 50 hostages to be released. That's our goal. This morning, I've been engaged with my team as we began the first difficult days of implementing this deal. It's only a start, but so far it's gone well. Early this morning, 13 Israeli hostages were released, including an elderly woman, a grandmother, and mothers with their young children, some under the age of 6 years old. Separately, several Thai nationals and Filipino nationals were also kidnapped by Hamas on the 7th. They were released as well. All of these hostages have been through a terrible ordeal, and this is the beginning of a long journey of healing for them. The teddy bears waiting to greet those children at the hospital are a stark reminder of the trauma these children have been through, and at such a very young age. Jill and I, Jill's with me here, keeping them all in our prayers today. Today has been a product of a lot of hard work and weeks of personal engagement. From the moment Hamas kidnapped these people, I, along with my team, have worked around the clock to secure their release. We saw the first results of this effort with the release of 2 American hostages in late October, followed by the release of 2 Israeli hostages. I've consistently pressed for a pause in the fighting for 2 reasons: to accelerate and expand humanitarian assistance going into Gaza, and 2, to facilitate the release of hostages. And over the past several weeks, I've spoken repeatedly with the Emir of Qatar, the President Sisi of Egypt, and Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel to help secure this deal, to nail it down. And I want to thank all 3 leaders for their personal partnership to get this done.
All right, well, we will see where we go from here. It's literally day to day. The negotiations there are ongoing, the hostage releases, and will there be more violence? I think you can certainly expect that for sure in the coming days, but we're closely watching that. I'm closely watching that. I don't know who we are. No newsroom. I'm in a shed, but I know many of you are as well, and thinking a lot about it and how it affects us here, of course. I also wanted to share with you this clip from Meet the Press. This is Mike Turner, and people try to make him, I think, in media and other places, this serious person, but he really isn't. And here he is defending the January 6th insurrectionists, for example. Congressman Mike Turner, that is.
Ask you quickly about the newly elected Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. He just made the decision to release, and he started the process, 40,000 hours of footage from January 6th. The Capitol Police have expressed real concerns that could jeopardize the security of the Capitol. Do you think it was responsible to release all of the footage from January 6th?
I think it's important for Americans to know the truth. This has been fraught with an unbelievable amount of misinformation and untruths. And I think this, when you see the footage yourself, it's going to give you an understanding of what was there and what occurred that day. Because we're currently only, depending upon really partisan descriptions of what happens. Now the American people can see.
Well, and speaking of which, some of your Republican colleagues have cherry-picked some of the images to, frankly, further some conspiracy theories. Are you comfortable with that?
I think it's been cherry-picked by both sides. I mean, certainly the January 6th Commission.
Well, let me
ask
you about your colleagues. Let me ask you about your Republican colleagues in the wake of this footage being released. Are you comfortable with, for example, Marjorie Greene posting, suggesting that this was an inside job by the Capitol Police? She removed the tweet, of course, but does that make you uncomfortable?
You'll have to talk to Marjorie Taylor Greene about that. But what I will say is I think it's important that the Speaker has taken this step.
What truth?
Because now people can see the truth.
What truth are we going to now see? I mean, if you cherry pick videos from any incident, if you were at a fight, at like an MMA or a boxing fight, you could tape the audience and say that there was no fight, I suppose. But we all saw what happened that day with our eyeballs, and we've seen it over and over and over again. So I have no idea what he's talking about. I got to dip into the right-wing echo chamber and try to figure out what Mike Turner and anybody else might be referencing about the truth of that day. But I wanted to make sure I played that clip and made an example of that jackass, because he's not a serious person at all, and too many in the media, I think, take him as one. All right, well, that is all of the news and audio I've got for you. All of the great comedy shows were off over the holiday break, but we'll get back to that tomorrow, because I like to end the serious news on a comedy clip from one of our favorites. But now I just want to plug my visit to my friend Gary's house. Gary lives right here in New City, New York, right near me. And I went over to his house the other night, the night before Thanksgiving, and made a video because he has more Christmas lights on his home and lawn than anybody in the country. And I'm being serious, potentially. He is going to be on ABC television's The Great Christmas Light Flight, 11th season. So I went over and did my version of an interview. Gary's a great guy, raising money for charity, and I will include a link to that in today's show notes and subscriber email, but you can watch it on my various social media platforms, because I think it was pretty funny and entertaining. So check that out. But right now, I am very happy to share a conversation about the importance and what to expect about COP28 with Mark Jacobson from Stanford University, interviewed by David Rothkopf on Deep State Radio's Road to COP28, which is a series of episodes that they put out over on Deep State Radio. That all of that is linked to in today's show notes as well. But I thought this would be an interesting thing to have on a few days before it starts. Stanford's Mark Jacobson is a real smart guy who warns that we need to be wary of greenwashing policies that distract from real substantive change. He joined Rothkopf on this special episode to differentiate the good policies from the bad and outline the pitfalls that the upcoming COP28 conference must avoid. Go check out the DSR Network, the DSRnetwork.com, and subscribe and support David and all of his work over there. And go say hi to Mark Jacobson at Stanford as well. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you will as well. And I'll be back with Rothkopf and more tomorrow, talking to Glenn Kirshner and more. But right now, let's do it. The Road to COP28 podcast, Stanford's Mark Jacobson.
Hello, and welcome to our podcast. I'm your host, David Rothkopf. This is another in our series that we call The Road to COP28. We're having a series of roundtable discussions with experts, and we're having a few one-on-ones with experts. And today, we are fortunate to be continuing in the latter category with Mark Jacobson, who is the director of the Atmosphere Energy Program and professor of civil environmental engineering at Stanford. His career has focused on a better understanding of air pollution and global warming problems and developing large-scale, clean, renewable energy solutions to them. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks very much, David.
Well, as you can tell, and as you know from the title of what we're doing, we're pulling together folks in the run-up to COP28 to get their sense of what's on the table, what should be on the table, what kind of deliverables we can expect. And I'd like to start with you right there. As you look forward to it, do you look forward to it? Do you think that there are positive outcomes possible?
Well, I'm always optimistic, and I know we can transition to where we need to go in terms of solving the climate, air pollution, and energy security problems we face, namely a transition to entirely clean renewable energy across all energy sectors. But I do know there are groups who are pushing for technologies that are not helpful, including carbon capture, direct air capture, blue hydrogen, and electrofuels, for example. The fossil fuel industry has these technologies as their pet technologies to push kind of greenwashing. These are greenwashing technologies that do nothing but increase carbon dioxide, increase air pollution, increase fuel mining, and increase fossil infrastructure and costs relative to using the same money to transition to renewables. In addition, there are technologies such as small modular nuclear reactors and bioenergy that are also not helpful that are being pushed. So if we focus on real solutions such as clean renewable energy like wind, solar, geothermal, hydroelectric for electricity generation, battery electric vehicles, some hydrogen fuel cell for long distance transport, heat pumps, electric heat pumps, electrifying buildings, and electrifying industry, if we focus on those technologies and processes, we can solve the problem. But if we try to distract ourselves with these non-solutions, then it's going to take a long time to solve the problem.
Well, let's break that down for, we have an audience of people they're policy nerds, so they're fairly familiar with these issues, but I'd like to get a little bit deeper. When you talk about the non-helpful technologies, you talk about carbon capture and some others, is the core problem with these that they're designed to perpetuate the use of fossil fuels, to mitigate the consequences of fossil fuels, as opposed to moving us completely away from fossil fuels?
Well, they're definitely designed to keep fossil fuels in business, but that's actually not the reason that they're not useful. The reason is they are literally not useful because take carbon capture, for example, or take direct air capture, which is sucking carbon dioxide out of the air. In the best case, the problem is it needs energy and equipment. Now, trees are also direct air capture, but they do not require energy or equipment. They grow naturally, taking carbon dioxide and water out of the air. But direct air capture equipment, what I call synthetic direct air capture, it requires energy. Now, in the best case, let's say renewable energy is used to power the direct air capture. Well, it's so inefficient that that same renewable energy, if you used it instead of running direct air capture equipment to replace a fossil fuel power plant, it reduces much more CO2. For example, a coal plant emits about almost 1,400 grams of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour of electricity generated. Now, most of that is from the combustion of which comes out of the stack, but there's also a lot of it from upstream mining of the coal. Whereas direct air capture, it only sucks out about 100 to 500 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. So you're basically, by using renewable electricity, 1 kilowatt hour of renewable electricity to power direct air capture, you're allowing, and not using it for replacing coal, you're allowing 1,400 grams of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour to be emitted and saving only 100 to 500 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. So you're increasing CO2 by making that decision. Same with natural gas. You could replace, instead of using renewable energy to run direct air capture, you can use it to replace natural gas and get more CO2 emissions. But in addition, direct air capture doesn't reduce any air pollutants, whereas coal does. So if you eliminate the coal, you're eliminating not only the CO2, but also the air pollution from the coal and the coal mining and the coal infrastructure. You're not eliminating any of that with direct air capture. You're therefore increasing all of these things. So and it's the same with carbon capture. It's the same with blue hydrogen, which is basically hydrogen from natural gas with carbon capture. And the same with electrofuels, which is basically producing gasoline from carbon dioxide from carbon capture with other chemicals that also require energy. So there's really no case ever that carbon capture, direct air capture, or blue hydrogen or electrofuels is useful for anything, except to keep fossil fuels in business.
Do you feel that public policy fora and the COP process are responsible for keeping these ideas that you have trouble with alive? Do you worry that that is something that is going to happen in the upcoming meeting as well?
Oh, yes, for sure. I mean, in the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, about 40% of all the funds that goes to useless technologies such as these. And I have no doubt that in the COP process that these useless technologies will be promulgated further. I mean, part of it is a lack of education. Most people are not aware of the numbers and are not aware of the problems associated with these technologies. And so as a result, the information, you don't have to have many people opposing it because they just don't know. And whereas those of us who do know, is like we can only reach so many people. And, despite how hard we're trying to get the information out, it's very difficult to get information to, millions of people worldwide, let alone billions. So yeah, there will be these technologies will be pushed and they will gain traction still. Eventually, they're going to fall on their own weight because they're doing nothing at all to help with the climate. They're just hurting the climate and air pollution and people's health and everything else.
Now, having tracked these things for a number of years myself, one thing that seems apparent and seems like good news is that the technologies that you cited as constructive technologies, renewables, so on, actually have been embraced somewhat more rapidly than people expected. Not as rapidly, perhaps, as we needed to. To what do you attribute that?
Well, yeah, renewables like solar and wind in particular, they're the lowest cost of electricity generation, new electricity generation worldwide. Batteries have come down in cost. Electric vehicles have come down. Electric heat pumps, electric induction cooktop stoves have come down in cost. I attribute it to economies of scale partly, and because just if you have a technology that's adopted widely, then just by its wide adoption and the mass production of it, the costs come down. But in addition, like solar and wind, they have no fuel costs. Whereas coal, natural gas, oil, and even wood, they all have fuel costs. You have to mine, transport, and refine fossil fuels, even uranium, and you have to go harvest wood. Whereas wind comes right to the turbine, solar comes right to the panel. So they have zero fuel costs, and that's what saves them a lot of money. And they're now commodities that are really basically simple to produce. So all you need is to produce them, and that's most of the cost is in their production. And they're free fuel over their life. So that's why they're so cheap. And they're being adopted. And plus, you can implement them quickly. That's the other thing. Nuclear, it takes 17 to 21 years between planning and operation of a nuclear plant. But new wind or solar takes like 1 to 3 years for a new wind farm or solar farm. for rooftop solar, it's 6 months. So that's what you need to solve this problem, are technologies that can be implemented quickly and are low cost. And that's what you have with wind and solar right now.
The COP is an international meeting. Countries come into COP with a variety of sort of legacy systems, a variety of economic and political perspectives. But for example, one of the most critical participants in these kind of discussions is China. And they've been a leader in a lot of this renewable energy for the market reasons you just talked about, for the cost reasons. They're now a world leader in exporting them. So they have a real stake in pushing these things forward. They have not been particularly enlightened on a number of their policies regarding coal and certain other things. Do you see them as a constructive force simply because they now benefit from the renewable business in a way that, is quite substantial?
Well, they're definitely a constructive force because they are installing so much solar and wind in particular, and battery electric vehicles, that it makes the rest of the world pale. The rest of the world pales in comparison. I mean, by the end of this year, China will have installed 500 gigawatts of solar alone. And just put that in perspective, worldwide, there are only about 360 gigawatts of nuclear power installed, from the beginning of history till today, worldwide, 360. China alone is installing 500 gigawatts of solar by the end of this year, and will have another 500 gigawatts within 3 years, by 2026. So have a terawatt. And worldwide, there's already a terawatt of wind installed, and China has put in a couple hundred gigawatts, I believe, this year. So they are installing more than anybody else by far in terms of the renewables. And same thing with battery electric vehicles. So, but having said that, they're also installing coal and some other fossil fuels and even some nuclear. So that's slowing them down. But those are, I think, that will end soon. And the numbers there are much smaller than the solar and wind. So, but overall, there are 9 countries of the world that are 98.5 to 100% just wind, water, and solar in their electricity generation. And China is down near like 12%. And the U.S. is around there too, maybe 10% or something. So, in terms of their overall energy, in terms of the electricity generation, China's probably closer to 15 or 20% of their electricity generation. The U.S. is around 20% of their electricity generations from wind, water, solar. But there are other countries way ahead of them in terms of percent, but in terms of the magnitude, China is actually the leader right now in terms of renewable energy production.
Do you expect, following these trends, that paradigm shift is going to manifest itself in the decade ahead? Do you think that's fast enough? If it's not fast enough, what is the policy response that's needed in a place like COP? Because COP has been traditionally kind of soft policy. It's been kind of, what can we all agree on? And then we'll all go play by our own rules. So, starting with Paris, and that was not, the breakthrough that it was touted to be. Are other factors going to push us along fast enough, or do they need a policy boost with some urgency?
Well, I think, first of all, it's possible to transition 80% of everything by 2030 and 100% by 2035, I believe. I mean, we have 95% of the technologies we need right now. Having said that, the question is, will we transition? And we need to transition not only electricity, but also transportation, buildings, and industry. And we've done a lot in electricity, but less in the other sectors. There are some countries that will transition pretty rapidly. But then, I think the bulk, because of social and political reasons, will be slower. COP should, it'll spur, as you say, it'll spur a lot of talk and promises, but whether it actually, we get implementation is another story. But having said that, again, it's definitely possible. We have the technology to transition. This really takes willpower. And but it also takes getting past these non-solutions, because those non-solutions are really what's slowing us down a lot right now. Spending money on useless technologies and keeping the fossil fuel industry alive through these useless technologies. And they're basically pretending as if they're doing something and convincing people that they are doing something. And this is going on in multiple countries. And you see this greenwashing with carbon capture and direct air capture in particular. it gives people this false sense of security that, oh, we're okay because, people say we're doing carbon capture and that's going to grow. But that is not going to do anything except delay and increase the CO2 burden that we need to reduce. So we do need more policies in place. And these policies need to be focused on transitioning to 100% wind, water, and solar across all energy sectors. So we need policies in each sector, that's electricity, transportation, buildings, and industry, to transition by different timelines, 80% by 2030, 100% by 2035 to 2040 across all energy sectors. And it's really only these policies that work. Carbon taxes are not going to work because nobody wants to pay tax, and so they're not going to be passed. But renewable portfolio standards in each energy sector, these will work, and they have worked so far. There are worldwide about 62 countries that have policies to go to 100% renewables in the electric power sector. In the U.S., there are 19 states and territories that have such policies. There are about 500 cities worldwide that have such policies. There are policies now in many U.S. states to get to electrify buildings. You have to have all electric buildings, new buildings, in like at least 40 cities and counties in California alone, for example. But we need policies at country levels, at state levels, and at city levels to transition each energy sector to 100% renewables as fast as possible.
One of the focuses at COP28 and in recent meetings has been on the issue of financing. Some of the financing has had to do with dealing with, disasters and crises. Some of the financing has to do with developing countries. Seems to me like the economics of what you're talking about here in the medium to long term are actually beneficial to the countries. The question is, how do you enable them to make the leap to those technologies? Do you see adequate financing options from the multilateral community, from other sources in order to help developing countries make this leap?
Yeah, so let me first give some information about this. So we estimate that worldwide it would cost on the order of a little over $62 trillion to transition, an upfront cost. But we would save about $11 trillion per year. That's because energy costs in 2050 worldwide for all energy will be about close to $18 trillion per year, whereas a transition to completely electrification across all energy sectors and providing the electricity with wind, water, solar will reduce that cost to about $7 trillion per year, primarily due to a 56% reduction in the energy requirements due to electrification, the efficiency of electrification, and another 15% reduction in the cost per unit of energy. So 62 trillion divided by 11 trillion per year, that's a 5 to 6 year payback time for an energy transition. Now, but you do need this upfront cost. You have to pay this upfront cost to actually get somewhere. And so many countries can afford it, but many countries cannot afford it. And right now, so certainly, having the countries that can't afford it help the countries that cannot afford it to get where they need to be is important. But because of the fast payback time, it's not much of a risk in my mind that we will have a payback pretty quickly. So if it's loans that are needed, that's one way to do it is through loans. But also, there will be companies like if one country wants to install a lot of wind, what they do is they say, okay, we want to build the wind here and the solar here, and let's have companies bid. And then the companies raise the capital to do it. So it's not the countries necessarily that have to come up with the money. It's the companies that want to build, and they're going to profit from this, but it'll pay back over time. Their investment will pay back. So sure, we do need incentive. Countries do need capital, but it's really the companies that are investing, are putting up these technologies that are taking most of the risk. And so there's a lot of ways to actually finance this that are not necessarily country has to come up with a lot of money. It's really the developers that come up with the money. Yeah,
presumably the consumers of energy are the ones that benefit in the long run because the price of energy comes down a lot. It's a fixed expense of theirs. Their bottom line would increase. So presumably not just the producers of energy, but consumers have a stake in this that could and they and presumably they could play a role in helping to finance it.
Yeah, well, I mean, just from my own experience, I mean, I was lucky to be able to build a new house like in 2017, and it's all electric, no gas, electric vehicles. But I put solar on the roof, batteries in the garage. I have not paid an electricity bill, a natural gas bill, or gasoline bill in 6.5 years. And I paid back the solar and batteries in 5 years due to the cost savings, avoiding putting gas pipes, avoiding a gas hookup fee, avoiding some roofing material, and in addition to all the savings of energy bills. So there is a definite benefit in the medium and long term. There is a short term, you need financing, as we've talked about. But that, I think, is there are also mechanisms of loans and also companies installing and coming up with the capital themselves. So I think there are a lot of ways to solve this problem.
So we just got a couple of minutes left. You follow what happens at COP28. What would you look for in outcomes, in a communique, in statement that would say to you, we've actually made some concrete progress? And what would be a sign to you that we hadn't?
Well, the ideal outcome would be, okay, we're going not to be counting carbon capture, direct air capture, blue hydrogen, electrofuels, small modular reactors, bioenergy as part of a solution. That would be one thing. Another, that would be a success. If there was also specific goals set in each energy sector, electricity, transportation, buildings, and industry, to transition to completely renewable by specific years, that would be another success. And have more firm commitments and penalties, that would be a dream, which is not going to happen. But not having any one of those, I think, is a failure, or at least it's not much progress. I mean, if there's a large push for these carbon capture technologies and the ones I mentioned, that is a failure in my mind, because that is just a step backwards and is harming the climate because that infrastructure will be placed for decades to come.
And so long as it's there, it's an impediment to making the changes that you're talking about, because it's the installed infrastructure. Right?
Well, I'll give you one quick example. Like in the United States, in the upper Midwest, there are 5 states that some companies have proposed to build up to 2,000 miles of pipelines for carbon dioxide to capture carbon dioxide from 34 ethanol refineries. And that cost is about $5.6 billion, but it locks people into what do you use ethanol for? Well, it's for combustion vehicles, and you lock people in to these combustion vehicles for decades, and you invade people's land with all these pipelines. If you took the same $5.6 billion and instead invested in wind farms to power battery electric vehicles, and even accounting for the difference in car costs and battery production, it turns out you'd save between like $40 to $66 billion over 30 years in fuel cost savings, because it's so much cheaper to have a battery electric vehicle. The energy cost is so much cheaper. So it's just in terms of, and then plus you'd reduce 2.4 to 4 times the CO2 emissions by going the battery electric vehicle route. So it's decisions like this where people are pushing the existing technologies and trying to add some greenwashing technology onto them, like carbon capture, that guide us in the complete wrong direction to increase carbon dioxide, increase cost to consumers, increase air pollution, increase land use, really do nothing but just keep these industries in business.
Well, and keep other industries in business in the upper Midwest, the area you're talking about. Ethanol also keeps the corn business in business, and it keeps the people who are manufacturing combustion-driven cars in business. So there's a political oomph behind it, because so many powerful entities within the region become advocates for it because it benefits them. Let me ask you one last question here, because from the benefit of users, listeners, I think it would be helpful to them. A little earlier, you said, well, there are 9 countries, I think you said, that are most of the way or all the way there. What are the countries that have the best policies? If somebody wants to go and say, well, here's an example of somebody who's doing it right, who would you cite?
Well, Denmark is the only country in the world that has 100% renewable energy laws in all energy sectors, electricity, transportation, buildings, and industry, basically. There are, as I mentioned, 62 countries that have laws in the electric power sector to go to 100% renewables, but only Denmark has it across all energy sectors. In terms of what's actually been implemented, the countries that there are 5 countries that are 100% renewables right now in terms of their electricity generation. That's Albania, Bhutan, Iceland, Nepal, and Paraguay. And there are another 4 countries that are 98.5% to 100%. Those are Ethiopia, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Norway, and Costa Rica. Costa Rica is the most diverse of all these. It's about, their production is about, all these countries are mostly hydropower, but Costa Rica is about 73% hydro, about 12% wind, 12% geothermal, and 0.5% solar. So they're the most diverse. But, really Denmark has the best policies, I think, in terms of, or most aggressive policies, I should say, across all energy sectors.
Yeah, one of the reasons I asked you to specify is because although all of these are relatively small countries, and that's, an issue, they are quite diverse in where they are geographically, quite diverse in their stage of development. And as a consequence, make the case that these kind of policies can be embraced in a wide range of situations. Mark, I am extremely grateful for you to take the time and to share this with us. I'm sure our listeners are grateful as well. Perhaps next year after COP is done, we can circle back to you and talk again about what we think has been done and what should be done. But for now, let me thank you, and let me thank everybody who's listened. We've got new podcasts on the climate crisis, climate change, COP28, coming out every single week. So please come back for more. And for now, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, David Rothkopf. Thank you very much for joining me. Well, you didn't join me, but for allowing me to share that conversation with Mark Jacobson. Thank you both. I hope that you will take this as a promotion and a suggestion to go listen to Road to COP28 if that's an issue that you're interested in. I hope that you are, as well as everything else that Deep State Radio is doing. They have a great series of podcasts over there, overseen by the brilliant David Rothkopf. Go check them out. All the information to their stuff is in the show links right here at mine. That's all I've got for you today. John Carroll taking us out as he does every day. Check him out, johncarroll.org right now, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Be the change you want to see. The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. Those are 2 quotes that people always love when I mention, so I like to toss them in there. John, take it away.